If you've ever wondered what biomimicry is, you may have heard a definition like it's innovation that's inspired by nature, or it's learning from the time-tested genius of the natural world to improve the forms, processes, and systems in our built environments. But for me, the most powerful definition of biomimicry is that it's a lens. It's a way of viewing the built and the natural environments, recognizing that there are so many solutions in nature that could teach us. That for 3.8 billion years, nature's been refining designs to some of the very same design challenges that we face, but doing so with a much greater efficiency, perhaps sustainability and beauty than we've been able to accomplish. So when I look at this forest scene, I don't see just trees and ferns and bushes. I see time-tested genius that has long-lasted climate change. I see towers that are moving fluids up hundreds of feet without electricity. Towers using benign manufacturing to make new packaging, new forms, facades, to create complex structures. I see towers that are collecting energy from the sun. And I see these solar collectors falling to the ground in a circular economy. In a forest, there are no wastes. There's no unemployment. And when we think about it, carbon is not a problem. Carbon is the building block. So everything that you see in the forest is built on a beguiling simple set of common raw materials, using only a subset of the periodic table of elements, using carbon as a building block. In this scene too, I see these towers connected to each other through underground networks, sharing information and resources, even with competing species, recognizing that collaboration can be more effective as a resiliency strategy than competition. There's definitely competition in nature. If you're asleep, you'll get eaten, but I like to call it co-opetition. The competition ensures innovation's constantly happening, that you're constantly evolving and changing and adapting. But there's so much more cooperation happening in the forest than we once realized. Trees sharing information and resources. You think of a canopy of a forest and how it's, this beautiful intact kind of layer. There isn't one tree that's 900 feet above the rest of them. And that intact canopy provides this beautiful dissipative structure so that environmental pressures, environmental perturbations from the outside actually get dissipated so they can't disrupt the understory. So in this, you can see that this forest is doing so much. It's dissipating storm events, it's helping slow down rain, it's disrupting wind, it's purifying the air, it's creating the soil, it's doing so much engineering for us, and it's doing it all for free. So biomimicry is a lens to recognize that one, nature is doing design, and that we could be inspired by the design. We could improve our own designs by looking to that as inspiration. But two, nature's also doing engineering for us. These ecological services that it provides amount in the trillions of dollars if we were to replace them. As we continue to destroy these intact ecosystems, we're destroying free engineering. We're destroying the very services that provide us life. Food production, air production, water purification, the things that sustain our species. Nature does it for free. Our breath feeds these trees, our bodies feed the soil. Why can't our buildings feed their ecosystem? This is what regenerative design truly is. It's when we start to harness nature's genius, start to build a relationship with nature, start to adopt some of her brilliant ideas, and start to build in harmony with her. For so long, we've been designing in a degenerative way, and that's primarily because we've been building with these assumptions that we're somehow separate from nature, or that we could control nature or dictate nature. And even though we can to a degree, and we've been very successful at doing that, we're now coming to a time where in resiliency literature, they call today's problems wicked problems. Wicked problems have no precedent for how to solve them. The thinking of the past is no longer appropriate. In other words, we will not solve these wicked problems with the same thinking that created them. We need to adopt new assumptions. And not to say that the old assumptions are wrong, they just might be outdated and need of evolution. And this is why biomimicry is so powerful for me, because we don't have to leave our assumptions, but we could step outside this house of technology that we've created and start to look at a new textbook, a new source of inspiration, a new source of creativity. This is the beauty of biomimicry too. It's like you don't have to do it. You can continue with that same thinking, but think of the competitive advantage that biomimicry gives us when we start to look to nature for design ideas. I think it's important to recognize too that biomimicry is not a new idea. It's a new term for an ancient idea and an ancient practice. Think of people like Leonardo da Vinci or Antonio Gaudi, who looked to nature for design inspiration, or even the indigenous people of Turtle Island, who looked at Arctic hare feet to inspire snowshoes, or copied polar bear dens to make igloos. Biomimicry is not a new idea, but it gives us a term that we can start to reflect on and start to recognize that the ideas of the past may need to be evolved, and that biomimicry could be a tool. The way I see it, there's no greater model of sustainability on this planet than nature. It has been thriving in this context for billions of years, designing and solving many of the same challenges that we face, but doing so simply. Think of things like passive design, or green chemistry, or circular economies, additive manufacturing, 3D printing. Nature's doing all of those things and has been doing it well for many years. Through biomimicry, imagine what nature could teach us to do next, the things that we're not aware of. Regenerative design is already happening in nature. And as we start to catalyze this transition to a regenerative future, nature could be our ultimate model, measure, and mentor for how to do it. And we don't have to start from scratch. Like I said, biomimicry is not a new idea. The most common example is Velcro. Invented in the 1940s by a Swiss engineer, George de Maistre was hiking through the mountains and was getting fed up with those burrs that stick to his pants and to his dog's hair. He took his frustration into fascination and recognized that these burrs have these little hooking mechanisms called barbules. And he thought, what if we adopted that technology? What if we could copy that? And he made Velcro, which is one of the most successful adhesives of our time. Another great example is a company I worked with in Toronto called Whale Power. We're perplexed by the bumps on the front edge of a humpback whale fin. They're curious why on the leading edge of an aerodynamic blade, a humpback would have these bumps called tubercles. And so they started to explore it in wind tunnel testing and applied it to a wind turbine blade and found that by putting these bumps on the front edge, it improved the efficiency of the blade by 20%. And this blade ran at slower wind speeds and was quieter than traditional blades. Another common example is the bullet train. Originally, this train had a nose like a bullet, and the problem that it faced is that every time it went through a tunnel, it created this pressure gradient, that when it exited the tunnel, it would create a sonic boom. And so you can imagine residents at the exit of these tunnels were not super impressed with this sonic boom happening every time a train ran through it. Luckily, there's a birder on the team who studied birds and was inspired by the kingfisher. He would watch the kingfisher dive from the air and enter into the water. And he would notice that it was very little splash when the beak entered. He thought, what if we applied that to the bullet train? And so they copied the shape, the form of the kingfisher beak and applied it to the bullet train. And the beautiful thing was that direct metaphor or that direct translation worked because very similarly, that kingfisher is leaving one medium, one density, and entering into another. Very similar to the way that bullet train was entering and creating a pressure gradient. So it was able to pierce that layer very effectively. When they applied that nose to the bullet train, it remediated that sonic boom, but it also improved efficiencies of the bullet train. And they didn't stop there. They actually looked at owl wings and the silent flight of owls to improve the noise of this train. A really cool example too is that we're working with a researcher in Harvard who has figured out an algorithm that describes the way that mycelium and mold will find the most effective transportation routes to different sources, whether it's food sources or trees or whatever it is. And we're applying this to transportation routes in master plans and cities. What's the most effective way to get from point A to point B? And this has been applied. Another great example is Mick Pierce, an architect who built Eastgate building in Harare, Zimbabwe. And he built the building using no HVAC system by emulating termite mounds. And the way that termite mounds can exist in very fluctuating temperatures, where the heat of the day it can be 40 degrees and at night it can go down to 2 degrees Celsius. But inside the termite mounds, the termites use this very clever tunneling system. They use gas exchange, they use stack effect. They also use pressure gradients from the wind. And Mick studied the termite mound and applied some of these principles to the Eastgate building. He saved $3.5 million in energy costs. And this building uses 10% of the energy of a traditional building in that space, in that environment. He didn't stop there too. He took his lessons from the Eastgate building and applied it to the CH2 building in Melbourne, Australia, ramping up these ideas of a stack effect and passive ventilation. And he made one of the most efficient, one of the most incredible buildings in the CH2 building. We've worked with a company called Pack Scientific. When you think of fluid dynamics and fluid modeling, you think of fans. Fans tend to push air, and in pushing, they create a noise. There's a friction that's happening, a cavitation that can occur. And that cavitation just shows that there's an inefficiency. That when we hear noise, there's something that we could improve on. So Jay Harmon, who invented the Pax impeller, was inspired when he was walking along the beach and found this broken seashell. He looked at the seashell and he saw this spiraling, this Fibonacci spiral, which is ubiquitous in nature. It's in the way that the waves curl, it's in the way that kelp curls in the waves, it's in the way that our skin pores function, it's in the way that when we pull our bathtubs, the vortex that's created. It's in pine cones, it's in sunflower seed packaging. This spiral is ubiquitous in nature, and so Jay made an impeller that pulled water through this spiraling. And what he found is that this impeller can move 10 million gallons of fluid with the electricity of 2 light bulbs. He built these impellers, and he's got 6-inch impellers that are one of the most popular mixing devices in municipal water towers. So these towers that need to mix the chlorine so that it doesn't stratify. These Pax impellers can mix that entire thing with the electricity of 2 light bulbs. And close to our very home, Atelier 1 built the Luxmore Bridge using reciprocal structures, very similar to bird's nests. You think of bird's nests and how they can create structures. Atelier 1 played with this technology, building a bridge where the interconnected links required no adhesives, but created that reciprocal retention so that you could build a bridge. And one of my favorite examples, and where we're seeing a push really in innovation in biomimicry, is Neri Oxman. Her Agua Hoja structure is using organic 3D printing. She's printing towers using materials that are common in nature, like chitin. Chitin is the structure that you find in exoskeletons and crabs and invertebrates. She's also using cellulose, which you find in plants, and pectin, and her structure is bonded by water. What's amazing about her structure is that it responds to its environment. It's not fighting its environment, it dances with nature. And as it decomposes or as it's destroyed, it can actually be regenerated. The beautiful thing about nature is that everything in nature is recycled. There's no such thing as waste. And I find this kind of interesting. The great paradox is that soil cannot exist without death, and yet life cannot exist without soil. So within that, I think we need to celebrate the evolution of ideas, of technologies, of buildings, of infrastructure. In a circular economy, death is celebrated because it allows reorganization and renewal. When a tree falls, it's giving the nutrients back for something new to emerge, something more appropriate for its context. And this is what I think we can do with biomimicry, is release these old assumptions, these old ideas, tapped into something, brilliant and genius that's designing in the same context as us, designing with the same base materials as us, but doing so simply and so beautifully. The beautiful thing though is that we're already doing biomimicry. We're one of the first companies in the world to hire a director of biomimicry. We're closely followed by Microsoft. There's an expected $1.6 trillion in global output for biomimicry-based innovations and technologies. There's an expected 2 million jobs in biomimicry, but right here in our own Urbana-Giron group, we're at the forefront of biomimicry. Think of RBG and their genetic algorithms, the way that they're copying bones and the way that nature will structure things using materials efficiently. Bones add materials where the stresses and strains are highest and remove materials where they're unnecessary. So through genetic algorithms, we're able to make structures and buildings that follow that pattern, that add materials where they're most appropriate. Similarly, their topography optimization is allowing us to be more resource efficient. Nature is intelligent in the way that it uses form before it uses material. It uses information and shapes before materials because materials are expensive in nature. Atelier 10 is at the forefront of sustainability and thinking of things like circularity, carbon sequestration, passive design, leveraging free energy. Nature only runs on sunlight. It elevates and exploits the seasons. It uses those seasons and those resources. Atelier 10 is already doing biomimicry in so many ways. And of course, we have projects that we've worked on together, like the 101 Tower for a private client, where RBG, Atelier 10, and B+H joined together to build this mangrove-inspired design. There's so much happening already that we're not starting from scratch. And with the wicked challenges that we face today, I also think we have an unprecedented opportunity. Our group of companies is filled with so much genius, and we have such a depth of intelligence, of opportunities, of experience, of capabilities. We have a huge reach in terms of our geography, And together, I think through a biomimetic lens and through the work that we're already doing, we could do some incredible work. I think through our group of companies, we can fundamentally shift the way that people think about design. We can fundamentally shift the way that we create communities, that we could push the paradigm to seeing towers that function as efficiently as a tree, or creating urban environments, creating cities that function as efficiently as a forest. You know, when everyone's trying to aim to do less bad, the brilliance of our strategy of building a regenerative future is that we're trying to go beyond less bad, to be a contribution again. I don't think of ourselves, of our species, as a bad species. We're just a very young one. When I think of our relationship and our place in nature, I recognize that we are nature. Our breath feeds the trees, our bodies will feed the soil. Why can't our buildings feed their ecosystems? And so what we're already doing is we're starting to explore, how do we measure that? How do we quantify our impact, or our positive impact that we make on our ecosystems? One of the things that we do is we measure the ecological performance of the site before a design and after a design, recognizing that nature is doing free engineering, it's sequestering carbon, it's managing the temperature, it's dissipating storm events, it's retaining water and storms, it's producing oxygen, purifying air, it's doing all of these things for us. We'll measure that, and then after, we'll measure how the ecological performance is with our building there. Did we do better? Did we improve the carbon sequestration or the oxygen production? We're very much in the infancy of this research and this study. And as a group of companies, I challenge us all to figure out what is the metric that we can use to identify that we're creating truly regenerative systems, that we're building environments that function as efficiently as a forest. This is our great challenge, but our great opportunity at the same time. Biomimicry is a shift in our lens. There's so much great stuff happening, and I think with emerging technologies like 3D printing, 4D printing, additive manufacturing, computational architecture, all the technologies that we have, we can make crazy ideas come to life. Ideas like buildings that breathe like skin, or filters that function like a liver, or structures that function like a tree or like a bone. Transportation routes that are efficient like mycelium and slime mold. Creating structures and packaging as efficient as a flower or as a seashell. There's technologies to make all of these crazy ideas real. And through our collective genius, through our collective collaboration, through the integration of all these brilliant ideas that may have never worked together in the past, I think we can come up with some pretty powerful metaphors and solutions that will help to shift an entire sector, help move the needle of our species to be more regenerative rather than degenerative, which is what we've been for hundreds and thousands of years. One of my clients said this to me, that biomimicry is recognizing that nature on its own is a work of art. It's beautiful as it is, but we've been asked to add to it. And for hundreds of years, we've been scribbling on this work of art, this Picasso, this Van Gogh, because we haven't spent the time to understand the brushstrokes, to understand the nuances of the painting, to understand how we can add to it in a beautiful way, how we can make it more beautiful. Biomimicry is that invitation to learn those brushstrokes, to learn the principles of nature, learn how nature does design, and then start to add to it. Like I said, one of my favorite quotes comes from Janine Benyus, and she says that we have to recognize that we're not a bad species, we're just a very young one. And when we adopt this lens and recognize that there's so much we can learn for how to build on this planet, then we'll start to build and create structures that harmonize with the natural world, rather than destroy, control, and try to dictate.